Following Smokey, we have a presentation by Paul Durham, a legislative consultant for the Garrett County Board of Realtors and a former Deep Creek Lake manager. He's going to be talking about some of the real estate issues that are of great interest, I think, to this audience. Paul?
There we go. What we want to talk to you about this morning are a number of issues that are related to the issue of how does Marcellus gas shale drilling affect real estate, homes and land, and the buying and selling of homes and land. I want to start out by sharing with you that the Garrett County Board of Realtors is neither pro nor anti-gas development in the county. What our focus has been, is going to continue to be, is as this Marcellus shale resource is developed, how is that going to affect the buying and selling of real estate and the appeal of real estate to people in Garrett County? And we've started weighing into that in the past year, and we're looking out into the future with an assumption that the shale gas will be developed, and what are some of the things we need to be prepared for within the real estate industry to deal with that. One of the points that I think it's important to make is what we have on the bottom, that the Deep Creek Lake watershed is not an island in the landscape. Local planning, the comprehensive planning, is starting to recognize that there's this lake influence area. We tend to think we have the lake and we have the rest of the county, but that's not true in terms of how they interact with each other. The lake influences the county, and the county influences the lake. So we believe that a lot of the planning for the future needs to consider that. Property listings and disclosures. In Maryland, the seller of property has an obligation to disclose to a buyer all the material facts about a certain piece of property, and if you've leased your land for Marcellus shale development, then that's something that you need to, if you're selling your property, that's something you need to disclose to a buyer. If you're a buyer, now that we know that the issue now, the big elephant in the room is going to be gas drilling. If you're a buyer, that's something that you want to look for. You want to look for that from the standpoint of the property that you're looking at. But what we're experiencing is there are savvy buyers who are asking, what's going to happen in the neighborhood? When we go shopping for a house, we want to know what the neighborhood's like. Someday we're going to want to sell that home. Someday we're going to want to sell the land we buy, and we want to make sure that the community that it's in is healthy for the long term, and it's going to be that the land is going to be appealing someday when we go to sell it. One of the things we quickly discovered that in the land records, a lot of the leases are very deficient in terms of what property they apply to. The one that we have on the screen here is a typical Keaton Group lease, and there's a place on the form to fill out the description of the property, and it's intentionally left blank. So if you're going to buy a piece of property, and let's say the seller hasn't been as forthcoming as they needed to be, or if you're interested in what's going on in the area, you need to know that it's going to be very difficult to take and match leases up with property. Now, the county has done some work in that regard, and they have a map of leased properties, but I had a conversation with the county, and they have said that they do not vouch for the accuracy of that map. So if you're relying on that map to make a decision about the buying and selling of real estate, caveat emptor, know that they don't vouch for its accuracy. Now, if you're in a transaction that involves a licensed realtor, there are certain documents and there are certain things that are in that purchase contract process where certain disclosures are done formally. But if you're in a private transaction, it may be a cash transaction, it's done privately. There's a risk there in terms of what's being disclosed and what's not. So you have to be very careful as you buy and sell real estate, particularly in private transactions, to make sure that you have a full understanding of how potential for gas and oil lease applies to the property you're looking at, or perhaps on adjoining or neighboring properties. The other thing, it's important to understand the difference between split estates and leasing, and all of these real estate terms are going to start entering the process. A split estate is a situation where one party owns the mineral rights and another party owns the surface. And depending upon how leases are structured, there's different benefits and there's different risks that flow with the different types of ownership that apply in those situations. So it's real important to become educated on that, to rely upon an attorney who is educated and experienced in that field so that when you do purchase a piece of property, you're fully informed on the degree of risk that you might take with regards to gas drilling. One of the things that we did also picked up on is there's no really easily accessible database related to leases or related to potential in the long-term potential environmental violations, hazards, accidents, things like that. So one of the things we're going to continue to advocate is easily accessible public databases where landowners and buyers and sellers can go and get the information that they need to make purchasing and selling decisions. One of the things that we often get asked, folks are looking for the smoking gun when it comes to property values. Will Marcellus Shale hurt property values? Will it improve property values? And generally in the conversation, it's polarized. It's going to hurt property values or it's going to improve property values. It's going to help the economy. It's going to hurt the economy. And there's really no smoking gun. Some of the stuff I'm going to share with you actually comes from some academic research and some of it within the past year or two about how that's affected. If someone were to ask me today, will Marcellus Shale development affect property values? I will say yes, they will affect property values. Now, will they affect them positively? Maybe. Will they affect them negatively? Maybe. Or will it be neutral, no effect? Maybe. It's a case-by-case basis. One of the things that Penn State recently published a study, they looked at changes in assessed values nearby in Pennsylvania in a gas drilling area, and they showed little change or minor positive impact over a two-year period as a result of shale gas drilling. The study doesn't take into effect changes in value of individual parcels. It looked at it from a regional perspective. How have assessment changed over a two-year period? Well, assessed values sometimes take years to show changes on a regional level, and they don't necessarily capture particular properties and how shale gas drilling may have affected them positively or negatively. But Penn State called for more studies in that area. And one of the things that we picked up on in other states, that there are examples where property owners were successful at getting their assessments reduced because of the effects of shale gas drilling. So there were people that had felt that they were negatively impacted and they were able to appeal their assessment and actually get it reduced because of that fact. Again, some of these studies looked at assessed values and not necessarily tracking of sales values. And in the depressed real estate environment we've been in, it's going to be difficult to actually look at comps in an area where property is moving very slowly. Penn State also talked about a boom and a bust effect. And this is something I think that if folks are investing to take advantage of the Marcellus Shale gas boom and the positive economic benefits, to recognize that it's a non-renewable resource. And when you invest into that curve of shale gas development, if you invest early or if you invest late, recognize it's a boom and bust economy. Natural gas prices are very cyclical. They rise and fall. We're in a depressed market right now. We saw, I think it was Chesapeake Energy, was capping wells to cut back on production to boost the to boost the prices of the natural gas. So there's this initial surge in value. If you're a business person that is going to, say, build a motel to take advantage of shale gas drilling, you may see that initial surge as being something that might benefit you, but also be careful that bust could occur very quickly, as is seen in some other areas. Cornell did a study of the effect of mineral rights on property values, and they concluded that there is a significant increase in property value when the subsurface mineral rights and the land are held jointly with land ownership. One of the things that one realtor shared with me the other day that is in West Virginia, they're starting to see that most transactions, the lease and the royalties are being separated from the land when the land is sold, so that the wealth and economic benefit of that gas lease would be retained by the seller and that the buyer would not get it. Conversely, you could have a situation where the gas lease is sold with the property, and if you're relying upon that gas lease, for example, to pay your mortgage, or you've made a business investment and you need that revenue, and then something happens like we recently saw with Chesapeake, all of a sudden the royalties stopped because production was stopped because the market fell off. You have to be very careful of how that royalty money is used and how you depend on it. I apologize, I'm going pretty quickly here. The environmental effects. That's generally when people talk about shale gas drilling hurting property values, shale gas drilling driving the values in a community down. Intuitively, we know that if there's methane migration into well water in a community, property values are going to sink. If we know that there's a hazardous spill, we even know that if there's bad press, that can depress property values. We saw a summer or two ago, we had a sewage spill on the lake. There was some press down in the Baltimore, Washington area. People started calling rental agencies and saying, we're no longer interested in our vacation to Deep Creek Lake, we're going to go somewhere else. We had people who were looking at property that said, no, I'm not interested anymore. So that's all part of the package, and that's something that we need to recognize and have a healthy conversation about it. Not hide our heads in the sand, because as Marcellus gas drilling and development occurs in the Garrett County, there will be press and there will be stories. And we know intuitively, based on past experience, that will result in a loss of interest in people being attracted to the area especially for resort properties, vacation properties, those types of things. But there are a lot of unanswered questions. One of the pieces of literature I looked at was talked about aesthetic values in real estate and how do you value those. You know, Deep Creek Lake, its scenery, clean air, clean water, recreation, incompatible uses are zoned away from areas that are for residential development, all of those types of things. That has a value, but it's intangible. You don't know how to capture that value. You only know it had value when you lose it. That's when you know it had and what that value was. For those here who have a home on the lake with a dock permit, the dock permit has a perceived value. When you lose it, your property has a different value, and it's something that we know. And a lot of the economic modeling, what some of the literature is saying is these types of issues are not plugged into the economic models. Cornell actually pointed that out, and they need to be before you arrive at a true conclusion about the effects of shale gas development on real estate. The Attorney General's office has put several advisories out about the effect of gas leasing on eligibility for mortgages. The other thing, if you have an existing mortgage and you've entered into a gas lease without consulting your lender, you've taken a risk that your lender may or may not be pleased with what you've done. So the Attorney General's office a year or so ago has put out a couple of advisories on that. One of the things that we did learn was the Housing and Urban Development HUD rules for federally backed mortgages actually have a screen out provision in them, and I actually brought a copy of it with me, that properties adjoining a gas lease site or for homes within a certain distance from an existing or a potential gas well may not be eligible for a mortgage. So if you're buying a piece of land, let's say you're going to buy a farm that has a gas lease on it, you need to know that it might be difficult to find a mortgage. There are lenders that do lend money on properties with gas wells or gas leases. There are some that preclude that don't want to be in that business. We also found that there are some lenders that will lend you money. Say if you're buying a small farm or piece of land with a gas well, they will lend you money, but they want the gas well for collateral. All of those types of things. So if you're interested in buying a piece of property with a gas well, you're going to have to do a lot of work on the mortgage side of that purchase. There are other issues, insurance issues, homeowners insurance, those types of things, if there's a gas well present, things that you need to look into. Title insurance. The Attorney General, in their advisory, they actually mentioned that in title insurance, certain things are precluded from the insurance on the title, and if a land is converted to a commercial use, sometimes the title insurance doesn't apply because it would be considered now commercial property. All of these things come into play. It's important to be educated, and it's important to understand also in your neighborhood, if these types of things are going on, they may affect when I go to sell my property someday. These things may affect the appeal of my property. They might affect the ability of somebody buying my property from getting a mortgage, all of those things start coming into play. Effect on the resort and the tourism environment. One of the things, there's a real shortage of literature on this topic. A lot of people that I talk to, they're searching for that study. They're searching for that experience in another state. Where has there been another resort like ours where they've gone through this, and what has been the effect? And it's hard to find. It's like the Holy Grail. It's not out there. So you have to start gleaning little bits and pieces of experience in other areas, and hopefully they might apply to us locally. Cornell did, one of the things that they shared in one of their studies was that some industries in the regional economies may contract as a result of proposed natural gas development. Negative externalities associated with natural gas drilling and production could have a negative effect on some industries such as tourism and agriculture. And the operative word is could have. Even Cornell does not know. Cornell does not have access to those types of studies. Another study, Christopherson and Ryder, how vibrant the economy is before drilling takes place and how resilient it is to these changes in land use. Studies show that less vibrant economies experience no long-term benefits in terms of employment and economic growth. Rural economies dependent on natural resource extraction typically have poor long-term development outcomes. So we are a rural county. Our economic base is dependent on 4 or 5 dominant industries. We're not as vibrant as perhaps some areas in Pennsylvania or New York. So there's a degree of risk that gas development may bring a positive benefit into the county, but it will be short-lived, according to Cornell. It will not be a long-term thing. So if you look at real estate and property values, you may see a surge in property values depending on what phase of the gas development you're in. But as gas development falls off, you will see a depression in property values because the wealth and the benefit of the gas drilling is no longer being applied to the property. And we see that right in our neighboring counties in West Virginia, where a generation or two ago it was coal and timber extraction. When the coal and timber extraction waned, we saw the economies of those counties go down. I mentioned earlier about the aesthetics. We market Deep Creek Lake, we market Garrett County to visitors and to investors in real estate. We market our aesthetics. We market the clean air, the mountains, the scenery, and those types of things. In fact, the most recent county comprehensive plan introduced the concept of scenic protection areas around the lake. So as a county, we're starting to recognize the economic value of that. How gas drilling will affect that, we don't know, but we have to recognize that gas drilling will have an effect on aesthetic values. Gas drilling will have an effect on the appeal of the county as a more natural, a more scenic place. What that effect will be, we don't know, so there's a degree of risk going into it. It could be minor, it could be major, depending upon the perception that others have looking in at the county. Again, I'd like to just reiterate the question of an acceptable degree of risk. What will policy and decision makers decide within a framework of risk? And I think Smokey spoke a little bit to this earlier. Who bears the risk should property be impacted by gas development? One of the things that we do now have this presumption of liability law that helps out in that regard. So there needs to be a community conversation on that, and more conversation. I think one of the comments earlier was continuing to engage in that conversation, because after a period of time, we have to understand that there will be things that we don't agree on, but there will things that we can agree on, and in that area of risk, what are we willing to accept? Finally, and this is actually my last slide, the effect on housing. Garrett County right now has a shortage of affordable housing. The county actually has a program of development of what they call workforce housing. It's government subsidized. There's government subsidized homes. And what Penn State has found out through their experience in Pennsylvania, but also looking at it on a national level, is that rental values typically increase as gas workers come into an area and need a place to stay. If they're not living in trailers in a man camp, then they're going to need to rent houses. And the company sometimes rents houses and may put 5, 6, 8 workers in the house. Lower income residents run the risk of displacement as market economics drive the rental values of properties upward. So those who are in the lower end of, say, the income spectrum and are renting houses, if workers coming into the area pull the demand up for those types of houses and the rent goes up, those people have to go elsewhere. Now, two things can happen. They can leave the area, in which case then the local labor force is reduced, and there may be a problem with attracting workers, and we actually had that problem at the lake a number of years ago, and there were actually plans by some businesses of actually importing workers and giving them houses and what have you. And Christopherson and Ryder, they called that the displacement effect. Some economists refer to it as crowding out. It can be positive for you from an economic development perspective. It can be positive for you if you own a rental property and you're getting $500 a month now, and the company will pay you $1,000 or $1,500 a month. You reap positive financial rewards from the development of shale gas development, but could also be negative for the person that can't afford that kind of rent and stay here, or if workers are displaced and the local labor force for non-Marcellus gas workers diminishes. Yeah. Yep, I've got a couple more points. All right, one final point. I've sat in a lot of meetings, and one of the things that I hear quite often are some assumptions that people are making about the scale and pace of shale gas development in Garrett County. Some say, we don't have a whole lot to worry. They're going to do it slowly. It's going to take 20 years to drill. We'll be able to absorb that. Most of the workers are going to be coming from outside. They'll be commuting in. They'll be living up in Pennsylvania, those types of things. What we will tell you is make no assumptions about what's going to happen. This will be a market-driven industry. We see now a loss of interest in Garrett County because the natural gas market is very depressed. The prices are down. They're capping wells. A lot of the drilling has moved to Ohio because of the wet gas. But when gas prices start to rise again, especially if the gas industry is able to get an export potential with exporting natural gas overseas, where gas prices are very much higher in the United States, you'll see a resurge of interest in Garrett County. And with that resurge of interest will come renegotiations or new negotiations for leases and those types of things. One of the things that I believe it was Cornell spoke to was when the development comes in, the gas companies want to extract as efficiently, as quickly as possible before that downturn occurs. So you're not like Chesapeake where you have to cap wells that you've drilled and you're making no money off of them. So we may in fact see a massive surge, depending upon some other things falling into place. But if gas prices ever get up, we may see a massive surge of gas development in the county, and all of the things that I talked about may actually happen quickly. And so it's just something to be aware of if and when you see it. Thank you so much.